Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, Neye AMANSEM da, Medinde Ujirafo, Kwesi Ra-Nehmpata Akan, Akwamumain Amaruka Etipi Mu Ujirafo, Ujiramain Mu. Greetings to all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning Africans, black people. Today is AMANSEM Day, Affairs of the Nation Day. My name is Ojirafo Kwesi Ra-Nehmpata Akan. Ojirafo, the Akwamu nation in North America, within Ojiraman, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you once again for tuning into the broadcast. We've opened up the chat room. If you have any questions or comments and you'd like to interact in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact. If you have any questions or comments on the phone line, simply hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. For those individuals who are new to the broadcast, we have 4 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We have Akanto Nana Som, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion on Jodad Monday night, where we deal specifically with the Akan expression of Nana Som, of ancestral religion, first and foremost because we are Akan, secondly because of the misinformation being propagated regarding Akan ancestral religion and culture, not only in the Western Hemisphere, but also from individuals on the continent of Afuraikai, who have been infected by pseudo-religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, and so forth, white culture in general, and thus their presentation of Akan ancestral religion and culture has been infected as well. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion, which grounds us in our ancestral origins. We originated from ancient Kanat, the Kan land, which is a title of ancient Nubia. A couple of thousand years ago, some of our people migrated from that region after the fall of Kemet, and northern Kanat migrated to the western part of the continent, reestablished Kanat civilization in the empire of Kanat, or the empire of Ghana, reestablished Nubian civilization and so forth, continued to progress. Hundreds of years later, because of Muslim invasions, some of our people migrated from that region of the empire of Ghana and reestablished ourselves further south in the savanna and forest belt regions of what is now contemporary Ghana and Ivory Coast, and reestablished Akan civilization in those regions. Subsequent to that, hundreds of years later, some of our people were taken from those regions and forced into North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe during the Musuo Kessie, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era, and this is how we ended up in these various areas. North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, Europe, Akan people ended up in these areas. However, we maintained our ancestral religious practices. Thus, Akan ancestral religion is called Winti in Suriname in South America, from the Akan term Quinti. Akan ancestral religion is called Obia in Jamaica, from the Akan term Obai. Akan ancestral religion is called Hoodoo in the United States and North America, from the Akan term Undu, meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life, root work, and so forth. It also means to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication. We find these exact same definitions in our ancestral language of ancient Kanat and Kemet, where in the Medu, the hieroglyphs, you'll see that Undu means medicine from roots, trees, plant life. You will also find that Undu also means to become heavy, inclusive of becoming heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication. Undu also means the offerings we give at the shrines to the deities and the shrines themselves. We also find that ancient Kanat, a title of ancient Kanat Nubia, is called the Undu land, and the people being called the Undu people. So we have that intergenerational, transcarnational transmission of culture from ancient Kanat to West Afurakai into the Western Hemisphere. We maintained our ancestral religious practices, and thus we were empowered and guided through those ancestral religious practices, through the deities and ancestral spirits, Yabosom and Nanonom Insamanfo to wage war against the whites and their offspring through taking up metal armaments as well as utilizing root work as chemical and biological warfare to wage against our enemies. We forced the end of enslavement through incessant warfare against the whites and their offspring empowered by our ancestral religious practices. So we deal with that on Joda Monday nights. On Abinada Tuesday nights, we have Ojida, which means purification. In that broadcast, we deal with ancestral religion in general, not just the Akan expression, but ancestral religion in general, wherever Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, or African black people exist in the world, and we show how it impacts every aspect of our lives. Ancestral religion is defined in essence as the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, these are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. We state that Ojida purification operationalizes Nanason. Purification operationalizes our practice of ritually incorporating law and ritually restoring balance. It is by this means that we execute our culture, execute our divine function in creation, and as we're living our culture, our way of life, which is the divine acceptance, the law, the love of order, and the divine rejection, the hatred, the repulsion of disorder and its purveyors. As we function in that capacity, execute our function in creation, we seek to align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. When we make legitimate mistakes, then we engage the ritual process to incorporate law and restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions so that we can get back on track with executing our function in creation as given to us by the Supreme Being and maintaining that balance, maintaining that order, the divine acceptance, the law, the love of order, divine rejection of disorder and its purveyors. This is how ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives as we seek to align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. So we deal with the purification of concepts, purification of culture, cosmology, and so forth on the Ojida broadcast. On Eguada, which is Marketplace Day, on Hawukuda Wednesdays, Akuada, we have Egua Marketplace, that broadcast where we showcase businesses, organizations, and institutions in our community, the Afuraitkaitnut community, those who are serving the community in a positive capacity, those who maintain their ancestral religious values as a foundation which informs their service to the community. We've showcased a number of businesses. We've published our Okom economic development model, which is an economic development model rooted in our ancestral religious values. It is a holistic approach to economic development for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people. Of course, you can download that model for free from our website. Part of that process, the operational component of that model is the Starve the Beast and Feed the Pride operation, where we make an assessment on a weekly basis to determine what funds we would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and then we starve the beast and feed the pride. We reallocate those funds away from the white businesses and direct them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. We showcase and target one Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut business, organization, or institution per week for optimal capital infusion. Thus, when you starve the beast and feed the pride, take $10 you would have spent at a Walmart or CVS or 7-Eleven or something like that and direct them to those funds to the business of the week. That's an infusion of $10 in capital for that business transferred away from the white businesses. When 1,000 of our people who are listening to the broadcast and are in tune on the same frequency starve the beast and feed the pride and reallocate their $10 each to the business of the week, then that's an infusion of $10,000 into the account of a black business in the course of 7 days. taken away from white businesses and directed to a black business, that black business receiving an infusion of $10,000 in capital in the course of 7 days that allows them to hire immediately and permanently individuals from our community to work in the business, to serve us at a greater capacity, expand their product lines and services to us so that we don't have to go outside of our community to access these services or these products and so forth. It's a win-win situation, of course. If we do not engage that process of starving the beast and feeding the pride, then by default, we leave that $10,000+ in the hands of our absolute enemies, the whites and their offspring, and by default, we are financing our own oppression. So this particular week, for Egua Marketplace, the Okon Economic Development Model Business of the Week is Asase Heals by Ama Asase Ajay. Ama was on our broadcast last night on the Egua Marketplace broadcast. You can listen to that broadcast. We've uploaded it to YouTube. Of course, it's on this Blog Talk Radio channel as well. You can listen to Ama talk about the business, and she calls and so forth, talks about her products and services. That is the business of the week. So please starve the beast and feed the pride. The week prior to that was Afia Asase Bretuo of Hoodoo Pharmacy and Conjure Culture and Couture. That broadcast is also posted on our YouTube channel, Ojirapo on YouTube, as well as this Blog Talk Radio channel. Patronize these businesses by starving the beast and feeding the pride. The funds we already waste with the whites in our spring, we spend about $20 billion per week as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people. We can take at least 10% of the funds that we spend per week in general, 10% of whatever you spend, redirect that 10% deliberately to the black businesses, organizations, and institutions. That's a transference of $2 billion per week away from white businesses and products and services, very often those that we don't really need, and direct that $2 billion per week to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut businesses, organizations, and institutions. We have that capacity just by making that simple decision. So tonight is AMANSEM Da, Affairs of the Nation Day, where we deal with specific issues confronting our people and how to address them from an Amanne perspective, a nationist perspective. We deal with Amanne, nationism, the purification of nationalism. We approach nation building, Amansesu, nation building, restoration from a purified perspective, from a cosmological perspective, from an ancestral religious values perspective, meaning a holistic, functional, proper perspective. We recognize the proper definition of an Oman. An Oman, or a nation, is a living, breathing entity, just like an organ is a living, breathing entity, governed by specific forces in creation that sustain that organal structure. An Oman, a nation, is a living, breathing entity in the true sense. We are the cells of that organal structure, and that organal structure as an entity is governed by specific Abosom, Orisha, Vodou, and so forth forces in creation that sustain it. We as cells within that organal structure, we function interdependently with one another, but we also support the greater functioning of the organ of which we are a component part. So when we have a proper understanding of an Oman, a nation, and we recognize that although we were forced into the Western Hemisphere, at some point we were directed by our ancestresses and ancestors, the Nanano Nsamanfo, our spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, to coalesce in a specific region in the Western Hemisphere, in this region of the Earth Mother's body, to interface with the Earth Mother divinities as they manifest in this region of their body on the planet, interface with the unique expression of the Abosom, of the Orisha, of the Vodou, of the Ntoru, the divinities that manifest in a unique expression in this region of the Earth Mother's body, taking in the plant life, animal life, mineral life for food as well as medicine that exists in this region of the Earth Mother's body, and that goes into our cells and so forth, and affects the manner in which we forge and form children and so forth. and the bodies of our children being affected by the plant life, animal life, and mineral life that form the cells in our body, including the sperm and ovum cells that will produce the bodies of our progeny and so forth. So that confluence of events, of us coalescing, blending ancestral blood circles in this region of the Earth Mother's body in the West, interfacing with the unique expression of the Abosome, as well as the inclusive of the Earth Mother divinities, the plant life, animal life, mineral life, and so forth, taking that in as food and medicine. That confluence of events allows us to forge and allowed us to forge a locative identity, a unique expression of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit identity, culture, and ancestral religious practice as what we call Ojira mind, the purified Ojira Omain nation, mind, land of the West, the setting sun. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people in the Western Hemisphere are Ojira mind, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. We have a proper understanding of what a nation is, so we deal with the nationism, the purification of nationalism, an approach to nation building rooted in our ancestral religious values. So we deal with issues that confront us as a people, as a group, as Ojira mind, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, we have our Ojira mind, the purified nation conference. Our third annual conference for that will be in June. We always have that conference here in D.C. in June around the summer solstice, where we deal with those issues that confront our people, nation building, and so forth. But this is what we deal with on the broadcast. So tonight's broadcast, Aqeru, the Cosmology of Imperfection and Recalibration. We want to examine the nature of Aqeru, perfection, and the cosmology of imperfection and recalibration. Our capacity for recalibration after a period of disalignment individually, as well as within relationships and communally, is a capacity born of the Aqeru perfection, seated within our Kait, our soul, by the Supreme Being, the Great Mother and Great Father, Amenet-Amen. When properly contextualized, our perceived imperfections are not always imperfection. Moreover, those genuine manifestations of imperfection are only temporal by nature for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, black people, as evidenced by our capacity for recalibration. This reality, as we say, has implications for Afurakani, African manhood, Afuraitkaitnit, or African womanhood, balanced relationships, and Amanne nationism. So when we talk about Aqeru, we're talking about, this is a term in our ancestral language of ancient Kanit and Kemet, so-called Nubian Egypt. Aqeru, from the root Aqer, meaning perfection, meaning excellence, but perfection. That is the nature of the Afurakani male and Afuraitkaitnit female. That is the nature of all created entities in creation. We are destined and designed to manifest Aqer or Aqeru perfection that is rooted and seated within our nature. It's very important for us to understand that fundamental concept, because our lack of perception of that nature, that our misperceived understanding or our misperceptions, perfection, and our misperceptions of what our imperfections are, that becomes the enemy of our progress towards the goal of Amanne nationism, dealing with nation building and restoration from a grounded perspective, but the proper understanding of our essential nature that empowers our progress towards Amanne nation building, nationism, nation building, restoration from a proper perspective. So we want to deal with this proper concept. So first and foremost, you look in an ancestral language dictionary, looking at our ancestral language, the term Aqer, as we said, means something excellent, precious, valuable, perfect, perfection. Then we have a group of divinities called Aqeru, meaning the excellent, perfected group of beings and so forth. That term is also used for the ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated. The Aqeru, or the beatified, or the illuminate ancestresses and ancestors. So we have people who make their transition, but then you also have a class of people who make their transition who, when they lived on earth, they had crystallized into their nature. They crystallized into that perfected state. They lived in harmony with divine order every moment of every day. They learned and concretized and manifested on a consistent basis, aligning every thought, every intention, every action with divine order every moment of every day. Once they crystallized into that function, then they manifested that, and they became models to emulate for Afurakani men and women, Afurakani women, Afuraitkaitnit men in the society. When they transitioned, they became part of that class of spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, often called Aku and Akutu, the illuminated ones and so forth, the shining ones, the beatified and so forth. Another title for them is Aqeru, those who have achieved that level of crystallization of their divine function. The crystallization of your function in perpetuity is what we call perfection. So they are the Aqeru. This is why also there is a title, one of the titles of the land of the ancestresses and ancestors is the Aqerit land, meaning the beautiful land, the perfected land, the excellent land, the perfect land, and so forth, the land of the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. So that's what we're dealing with when we talk about Aqeru. So that seed of perfection we talk about seated within our Ka and Kait, that's our nature. So when you look at creation in and of itself, the whites and offspring will teach that nothing is perfect when they put forth their foolish doctrines and pseudo-religions and fictional cartoon character deities who never existed of any race or in any form whatsoever, inclusive of Jesus, Yeshua ben Pandir, Yehoshua, Yahweh, all of these other foolish names and so forth never existed of any form or of any race whatsoever. The same is true of the fictional cartoon character Muhammad, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Jacob, Esau, Buddha, Brahman, Mahavira, all these fictional cartoon characters, Allah, Yahweh, all of them. But when they put forth these fictional characters and their foolish doctrine associated with them, they will put forth this notion that perfection does not exist except in their fictional cartoon character deity. They put forth the foolish notion that we're born in sin, we're of a sinful flesh, and we deserve to burn in hell and so forth unless we receive the grace of the Creator and all this other nonsense. Now, they come into being in a quote-unquote sinful or corrupt or perverse flesh, melanin, recessive creatures and so forth. They may be born into that, but that has no bearing on the reality of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. Our nature is Aqeru. Our nature is perfection. It is seated within our Ka or Kait, the soul, the divine consciousness. So, when we understand that reality, when we understand what we have seated within our own soul, the deity dwelling in the head region, then we understand why we have an inclination towards following that divinity, aligning our thoughts, intentions, and actions with that divinity. We also understand why we were given ritual practices to recalibrate when we make mistakes and get off track. We can recalibrate with that seed of perfection dwelling within the Ka or Kait. The reason why we have these ritual practices to recalibrate with that seed of perfection seated within the Ka or Kait is because that is our nature. We have a divine function to execute in creation, just like every cell in the body has a function to execute in creation. It has a form, function, relationship. Every organ and system and gland in the body has a specific function to execute in creation. They are designed in a Aqeru fashion, in a perfected fashion, and they execute their designs or execute their functions according to their designs harmoniously, unless we do something to disrupt their functioning or disfigure their form and so forth. But their natural form, that natural function, is manifest and came into being in an Aqeru condition or perfected condition. We ourselves within the great divine body of the Supreme Being, we were seated with that Aqeru nature, that perfected nature, It is ensconced and seated within our Ka, our Kait, our soul, our divine consciousness. So anytime we engage in certain kinds of behaviors, or we fall off track, and we engage in some form of self-destructive behavior, whether it's physically, whether it's emotionally, whether it's mentally and so forth, whether it's culturally, even politically, that is temporal for Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people, because when you understand you have a Ka, a Kait, you understand that these temporal expressions of disorder are simply that. They're temporal. They are not reflective of your essential nature. So whatever has taken place in the past, whether you've engaged in self-destructive behavior, suffered from some form of trauma, torture, whatever it is, we're not talking about people who are perpetrators of criminality like child molesters or rapists and individuals like that. They've lost that perfected state because they've lost their own Kait, that divinity is separated from them and disengaged from them. So they only deserve to be executed. So this notion of all lives have value, that is totally foolish. The lives of the enemy do not have value. The lives of our enemies outside of our community have no value. And those who become enemies within our community, criminals, child molesters, rapists, murderers, meaning unjustified killing. Justified killing is sacred. Unjustified killing is criminal. So those who engaged in criminal behavior in that fashion, their lives have absolutely no value whatsoever. They deserve to be exterminated. But we're not talking about those individuals. We're talking about when we engage in self-destructive behavior, we've fallen into self-destructive patterns in some form or fashion. In essence, when we understand our true nature, we understand instantaneously that that is temporal. We understand that we have the capacity and the responsibility to recalibrate, because we return and we have that inclination to recalibrate. So not only the capacity, not only the responsibility or the obligation, but we also have the inclination written into our nature, written into our Kait, our soul, our divine consciousness, to move towards that reestablishment of order, that realignment of order within ourselves. So first and foremost, we must understand the infrastructure that gives birth to that perfected nature. The soul, the Ka, the Kait, called Okra and Okrawa and Akan and Oriri Inu and Yoruba and Selido and Vodun, is a deity dwelling in the head region of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people only. So as a spirit, an ancestral spirit, prior to being drawn into the womb of the woman who will ultimately become your mother, when you're an ancestor and ancestress in the spirit realm, before you're drawn into the womb of the mother, you're drawn up to Nyamewa, Amenet-Amen, and they direct a divinity, a deity, to take up residence in your head region of your spirit to guide you throughout the course of your life. No different than physically, you have a physical entity in the head region of your physical body, which is the brain. That brain is wired with the blueprint for all of the operations of the body, of the various organs, glands, and systems, and it gives those instructions throughout the course of your life. Your spirit body has a smaller spiritual force and entity in the head region of the spirit body, wired within that, written within that spiritual force is the blueprint upon which you are to operate, what your divine function in creation is, what your energy complexes are. If you're going to be a fiery individual carrying that fiery energy of fiery abosom into divinities, into the created universe, into the community and so forth, you're assigned the divinity of fire. If you're a child of a watery divinity and so forth, and you are tasked to bring that watery energy into the communal sphere and so forth, you're assigned to that kind of divinity, taking up residence in the head region and so forth, and the kinds of activities and functions and manifestations of energy coming from you will be written into your nature. So you have that spiritual force, the Ka, it's a deity, a male deity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female. That divinity, under the direction of the Supreme Being, takes up residence in your head region of your spirit body, installs itself, and then now you are a spirit, a Sunsum that has a soul, an Okrawa, and then after that event, then you are eventually sent into the womb of the woman who will be your mother, and 40 weeks later you are born into the world. You're a spirit operating through a physical body, but in the head region, you not only have a physical brain, but you have a spiritual force that is seated in the physical brain. The physical brain is a shrine for the Ka. The Ka is the soul, the divine consciousness. That divinity manifests initially as an inclination of a strong pull in your head region towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with divine order and thus in harmony with the function you are to execute in creation. It also manifests as a push away from or a pull away from sets of thoughts, intentions, and actions that would otherwise place you out of harmony with order. Through ritual practice, that pull becomes more than just a pull. You can communicate with that deity. He will show himself to you. If you're a male, she will show himself to you if you're a female, and you can communicate with that divinity just like communicating with ancestresses and ancestors and other deities as well. Learning directly from that force in creation, the nature of your energy complex, how to utilize that energy complex, how to align yourself consciously to make proper decisions rooted in the nature of who you are. So you have that divinity within your head region. That is the manifestation of Aqeru, or perfection. That is the manifestation of order. When you see order manifest, you're seeing perfection. You can't draw a picture of order, but when you see order manifest, it manifests as divine harmony. That is expressed as beauty, and that is a revelation of perfection. This is what we're dealing with. So, when we understand that cosmology, and we have a proper contextualization of our perfection, we also have a proper contextualization of imperfections. Then we do not become saddled with guilt when we fall into certain forms of behavior, even though we were moving forward and trying to advance and progress and so forth, and we make mistakes. We don't crystallize into perfection until we reach that level of maturity. It's no different than a child growing up into full adulthood physiologically. The child grows and develops, and once they reach that peak, they reach full development, full growth and so forth, they're no longer expanding, then they begin to crystallize into the form that was written into their nature when they were just a zygote in the womb. The entire blueprint of the unfolding of that zygote into a fully formed human being, it's unfolding over the course of years, and by the time you reach not only your early 20s where you stop growing as far as taller and so forth, but once you reach around the 28th year and your brain finishes its physiological development, the pairing process of the pruning process of the synapses and so forth is completed, and you reach that full brain development around the 28th year on average, then physiologically you've crystallized into that fully formed adult. Until you get to that point, you're not fully crystallized, you're not fully formed yet. Until we get to the point, maturation-wise, we're not fully formed yet. We haven't become an honored elder or an honored elderess. So until we get to that point of being a nana or an honored elder, honored elderess, there will be some times in life that we make mistakes. There will be a manifestation of those temporal imperfections. But that's not part of our nature. That's why they're temporal. This is why you have the Kait leading you in the proper direction. And when you make those mistakes, we have the ritual process incorporating law, ritually restoring balance ritually so that we can get back on track with that divine function. We are not hindered by temporary imperfections. We don't define ourselves by temporary imperfections. Whatever has taken place with regard to self-destructive behavior in the past, whatever has taken place with regard to trauma in the past, injury in the past, yes, that has taken place, but it doesn't define who you are at the moment. What defines you, number one, first and foremost, is what is seated within the Ka, the Kait, the soul, the divine consciousness. And once you're aware of that, consciously aware of that, and you begin to realign your thoughts intentions and actions with that divinity in the head region, that's when your new life begins at that moment. And anything that happened in the past, you recognize what happened in the past, but it no longer can possibly define you because you understand what your true nature is. So it doesn't matter what has taken place in the past, even if it's the recent past, even if it's yesterday or a week prior, and you fell off track and you made self-destructive decisions. And then you're trying to figure out why you keep making these self-destructive decisions. That's not part of your nature. If you get into that cycle of tearing yourself down because you made self-destructive decisions, and which led to self-destructive circumstances and negative circumstances and so forth, then you keep yourself in that cycle. You keep refueling that cycle. But when you jump out of that cycle, then you recognize reality. The way you jump out of that cycle is first and foremost through awareness of your true nature. But awareness is not enough. It's one thing to be aware of something, have knowledge of something, even detailed, explicit knowledge of something, but until you engage that reality, the source of that awareness, and activate it, then the awareness is just awareness. A paraplegic is aware of everything that's taking place in the room. But since they have no power to move and operate and activate, then they can't take advantage of things that could be valuable to them that are in the room, the resources that are in the room. Somebody has to engage certain things for them. So awareness is not enough to empower you. You become aware of reality, but then you engage in activities to activate the source of that awareness. So we engage the ritual process to align with the Ka, align with the Kait, to repel negative behaviors, repel negative ideas, repel false ideas and so forth, repel the false perception of our imperfections, and properly contextualize them to recognize they are temporal and how to overcome these temporal imperfections to get back in alignment with order. So we have texts in ancient Kemet that speak to this reality. The texts we find in ancient Kemet are simply the codified experiences of our ancestresses and ancestors that they leave for us because they understood that at some point we lose our way. So when we become aware of these texts and the information found in them, it makes us aware of the reality of our nature. But then once again, we must move forward then and engage the ritual process so that we can activate the source of that awareness so we can become grounded in that awareness through direct experience, so we have knowledge of exactly what they were talking about. So we don't simply sit around reading texts and memorizing texts and thinking that that has something to do with being knowledgeable or progressive, because it does not. You can memorize text all day long. Just like we said, a paraplegic can memorize text all day long. They can memorize a book about how to ride a bike. But because they don't have the power to actually activate that, then their awareness is just awareness. We can read about text all day long, but once we activate the forces in creation that are connected to our spirit body so we can live this experience and use our energy complexes to make things happen in a harmonious way, to harmonize our lives and recalibrate ourselves, then we're actually living that awareness. So that's what we engage in. So we have these texts that remind us of our essential nature, remind us of our capacity to recalibrate, remind us of the Aqeru, the perfection that's seated within our Ka and Kait, but then they're also a roadmap ritually to bring that awareness to the full, to the forefront, not only of our consciousness, but to our lived experience. So it transforms our lives. This is key for Amanne nationism, the purification of nationalism. The only way you build strong Afurakani men, strong Afuraitkaitnit women, is to ground us in the reality of our nature. That starts off with the balance of male and female. So when we look at our book, first before we go to the text of Kemet, when you look in the book, Oberima Afurakani Manhood, Obasain Afuraitkaitnit Womanhood, you can download those books for free on our website. There are 7 principal values of manhood and womanhood based on the deities that govern, animate the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week. So we have 7 principal values, 7 chapters of each book connected to the 7 principal values, which are animated by the deities that animate the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week. So it's a holistic cycle that governs the planet every 7 days and all natural cycles. That holistic cycle is animated by forces in nature that regulate that cycle. Those same forces in nature that regulate that natural cycle also regulate the natural chronobiological cycle within our body, the circumception cycle, which is a 7-day cycle that renews the various cells and functions in our body and so forth. Those same deities give their input of their energy complex, lend their energy to these 7 principal values of manhood and womanhood. So therefore, every single day of the week, we have a principal value of manhood or womanhood to align ourselves with, and we are also aligning with the divinity that governs that day and affects the planet on that day. So all of us are on the same track every day of the week. But the first principal value of Oberima Afurakani manhood and Obatain Afuraitkaitnit womanhood, the first principal value is order. And what order means is we must recognize the divine order of creation, the balance of male and female. That is the first principal value of manhood and womanhood. Such recognition is the foundation of physical, emotional, mental, cultural, and spiritual stability. Without this understanding, your thoughts, intentions, and actions will be imbalanced, thereby rendering your person unstable. So we go into some details about that. We talk about the foundational balance of creation is rooted in the ultimate reality, the divine balance of male and female. The great God is called Amen. The great goddess is called Amenet. The most ancient names of the Supreme Being, the great fathers, Amen, great mothers, Amenet, and Akan is Nyame and Nyamewa, and Vodun is Lisa and Mawu and so forth, and Igbo is Chukwu and Komosu, Olorun and Olokun in the Yoruba tradition and so forth, Kolosiolo and Katieleo in the Senufo tradition, the great mother and great father, the Supreme Being. They function together as 2 halves of the great divine whole, 2 distinct entities that function in harmony with one another as complementary opposites. That is the foundational balance in creation. Everything extends from that. Then we talk about the Creator and Creatress, Ra and Ra'et, the Creator and Creatress, grandchildren of the Supreme Being. Then we get into Ma'an, Ma'at, Ka and Kait, Heru and Het Heru, Asar, Aset, Set, Nebet, Het, Geb, Nut, Shu, Tefnut, all of these different divinities. There's a manifestation of that twinning principle, but the foundation is Amen and Amenet. When we are grounded in that, we understand our Ka and Kait, our soul, our divine consciousness, proceeds from Amen and Amenet, and that divine seed of consciousness and perfection, Aqeru, is born of the divinity, the divine consciousness of Amen and Amenet seated within our spirit's brain. So that's the first principal value of manhood and womanhood, order. Recognize the divine order of creation, the balance of male and female. All of the other principles build on that reality. And we understand that as an Afurakani man, you're an emanation of Amen, the great God. As an Afuraitkaitnit woman, you're an emanation of Amenet, the great goddess. And we function together as 2 halves of a whole. We also recognize the reality as emanations of the great mother and great father, that we have that perfection seated within us. So if we make mistakes, once again, those are temporal. They are temporary. They are not indicative of our true nature, but they are temporal expressions that we have the capacity, responsibility, and inclination to overcome. So when we look in the text of ancient Kemet, we can see this defined in reality. And then we have a roadmap also ritually to engage the process of recalibrating ourselves and living that experience so we can gain direct experiential knowledge of that Aqeru nature, that perfected nature that dwells within each Afurakani male, Afurakani female. And then we don't lose sight of ourselves when we fall into temporary mistakes or temporary imperfections. We recognize the imperfection, overcome the imperfection, and move forward without hindrance. So, we're going to look at one of the texts. We're going to look at 2 of the texts, as a matter of fact, from the Runu Pert Imheru, so-called Book of coming forth by day, misnomer, Book of the Dead, and so forth. The first one we're going to look at is the chapter of making transformation into the Bennu, the so-called Bennu bird. The whites and their offspring called the Bennu bird, the sacred Bennu bird, the phoenix. Of course, that's a corruption of Bennu, become Pennu and Thenix and so forth. But we're going to read the chapter and then we're going to get into some detail. So it says, and the scribe who made that transition, this particular papyrus was made for him. So he said, I came into being from primordial, unformed matter. I came into existence as Kepra came into existence. I grew in the form of plants. I am hidden in Sheta, the sacred tortoise. I am the essence of every deity. I am yesterday this of the four and the seven great serpent divinities who came into existence in the east. I am the great one illuminating the purified ancestresses and ancestors by his body. This God set to Huti concerning them by judgment, that of the dweller in Sekhem, talking about Heru, together with the spirits of Anu. Sailing among them, I have come, I am crowned, I am illuminated or glorious, I am mighty, I am strong among the deities, I am the deity Kainsu, repulsing all. So now, what is that dealing with? First, making a transformation into the Bennu bird. That's the name of the text, the chapter of making transformation into the Bennu. The Bennu bird, you'll see that Bennu bird flying across the sky in ancient Kemet and then settling upon a mound. Now, in Kemet, it hardly ever rained. The economy was dependent upon the flooding of Haki and Merit, the male and female forces of the inundation of the river, so the river would swell, overrun the banks. The majority of the country was flooded for a period, and then at some point the waters would begin to recede after a number of months. And once the waters began to recede, black silt, fertile black silt, was deposited on the banks of the river during the flood. And once the water receded, then they would see that black silt, that rich black silt deposited on the banks of the river. Then they could go out, plant the crops in that fertile black soil, and that would portend abundance and so forth in the coming year. So that cycle happened every single year. The flooding period, then the water would recede after a number of months. The black silt would emerge because the waters were flooding and people would see the black silt. Then they would go out and plant the crops, and then months later, great abundance would be manifest. Now, when the waters were covering a large portion of the country, it appeared that the entire country was flooded. It appeared as if it was going back to the Sept Tepi, or the first time, the primordial area when the entire earth was covered with water. And then Ra and Ra, the creator and creatress, moving through that solar fire, penetrated the earth. Their expansion and contraction within the earth created volcanic eruptions on the ocean floor and caused a portion of the ocean floor to surge upward and break through the surface of the water. That first high land, called Ka in Kait, was the first land mass that existed on earth, breaking through the surface of the primordial waters. And Ra and Ra moved through that primordial highland, the Kait, which is the term for highland, mountain or hill, and so forth. Ra and Ra moved through the highland, the Kait, and animated that highland and gave it life and vitality, and therefore plant life and mineral life was vitalized and manifest through the primordial mound and so forth. When Ra and Ra energy is moving through matter, they take on the titles Afura and Afurayat, Afu meaning flesh, but also meaning house, chamber, place of residence. So when Ra is moving through matter, Ra becomes Afura, meaning Ra moving through the flesh, the Afu, the house, the place of residence. Your body is a house or place of residence for the spirit. It is Afu, it is flesh. There is also Afu, a house or place of residence for the spirit. So when the spirit moves through the body, it takes on, the body is moving through the flesh. When Ra is moving through the material world, energy penetrating the earth, enlivening the soil and so forth. Ra is called Afura. When Ra'et is moving through matter, she is called Afuraiet. Ra'et moving through the Afu, moving through the matter, moving through the flesh, and so forth. So when Ra and Ra'et move through the primordial Kait, the first landmass that rose up through the surface of the primordial water, they are Afura and Afuraiet, moving through the primordial highland or the primordial Ka or Kait. So it's called the Ka of Afura, Afuraka, the land of the Creator, Afuraitkaitnut, the land of the Creatress, and of course, in our book we show that's the origin of the term Africa, Afuraka, Afuraitkaitnut. That's primordial. But that same scene took place every year in ancient Kemet because when the waters flooded, it appeared as if it was at the first time the Septepi, the primordial era, but then the waters would begin to recede. And when the waters would recede, slowly, the first thing that you would see as the waters are receding are the highlands or the mounds or the hills. So as the waters were receding, the first thing that would peak from the surface of the water are the highest points, the hills, the mounds, and so forth. And when those mounds would first begin to emerge and apparently rising up from the water, but really emerging as the water is receding, those mounds will become apparent. And the Bennu bird flying across the sky, not finding a place where it could stand until the waters began to recede, they would see the high points of the tops of the mounds, the peaks of the mounds, and the Bennu bird settles upon the mound. In the text of ancient Kemet, they talk about the Bennu bird being connected to the soul or the spirit of Atem, and Atem, in fashioning the world, says he couldn't find a place whereupon he could stand, but then eventually he laid a foundation in the god Ma'al and so forth, and later Ma'at. And you have that text in the Nationism papyrus and so forth. But when you see the Bennu bird flying across the primordial waters and eventually settling on the primordial mound, that is akin to the sun sailing across the sky, and eventually the sun sets. And when it sets in the west, in the western mountain range, it appears that the sun is going down into the earth and penetrating the earth. You see the deity Atem in the red setting sun, sitting inside the red setting sun, and the sun sits on the western mountain range and penetrates the earth. And then that solar energy, that fiery energy, penetrates the earth and empowers the earth, fires up the earth, hardens the earth, and so forth. So that primordial mound that rose up out of the water, it was soggy and so forth, but when the energy of the sun penetrates the earth, it hardens that primordial mound and it becomes a solid landmass. So you see the primordial Bennu bird flying across the water and sitting upon the primordial mound. That bird is a sacred animal totem of Atem as well as Ra and so forth. It is a solar bird with solar implications. It's akin to the sun flying across the sky and sitting upon the primordial mound to fire up that primordial mound and harden it and concretize it and make it solid and powerful so that we can stand upon it and function upon it. This is why the White Neural Spring talked about the phoenix was the bird that lived for a certain period and then it went and died, but then it rose up out of the flames and was reborn. This is coming from the Bennu bird that flies across the sky, the spiritual animal totem of Atem and Ra and so forth. It sits upon the primordial mound just like the sun sitting upon the primordial mound, firing up that primordial mound, and then going into the underworld, but once again rising up in the east and manifesting as the new sun and so forth, the new Aten, the new Atenit, the resurrection of that primordial power to enliven us and enlighten us once again. Now, this is a chapter of making transformation into the Bennu. That means when you go into the underworld, when you sink down into the underworld, when you're underwater, when you find yourself under, you're like the Bennu bird. You have the capacity to resurrect. You have the capacity to enliven and enlighten once again. You not only have that capacity, but you have the responsibility and you have the inclination because you have that Aqeru, that perfected nature within your Ka Kait, seated within your Ka and Kait. So this chapter of making or transforming into the Bennu, that sacred animal totem, that fiery animal totem that will sit upon the primordial mound and give power and solidity and substance and groundedness to that primordial mound. You have the capacity to give power, enlightenment, become grounded, and solidify that which you set upon. You have that capacity, that obligation, and also that inclination. So the chapter of making transformation into the Bennu, that's what is rooted in. That entire cosmology is all implied just within the title of the chapter. But it talks about our essential nature. So when it says, I came into being from the unformed matter, that's talking about the primordial unformed matter. We just talked about that. Then it says, I came into being in the form of the unformed matter. I came into being as Kepra, the one who transforms. I grew in the form of plants. I am hidden in Sheta, the divine tortoise. I grew in the form of plants, the divine solar energy penetrating the primordial earth, giving life and vitality to the primordial earth. When you recalibrate yourself, then you give life and vitality to those who you are connected to. You come into being in the form of plants and so forth. The solar energy is drawn up through the plant, and through photosynthesis, it transforms the plants and so forth. It says, I am hidden in the tortoise. The tortoise, of course, has that great shell. It can contract and recede into the shell for protection. Sometimes we recede into our shells for protection. Sometimes we recede into shells because of fear and anxiety and so forth. But then, of course, the tortoise doesn't remain in the shell. Once the protection is manifests and taken care of itself, it emerges from the shell. Moreover, we understand in our ancestral religious practices on the continent as well as here in North America, the shell of the tortoise of Sheta is a divinatory instrument, and we utilize those shells for divination to communicate with the ancestresses and ancestors and with the deities, inclusive of the deity in the head region. So I grew in the form of plants. I am hidden in the Sheta, in the tortoise, meaning I have the capacity to communicate with the ancestresses and ancestors. I can go inward. I can go into the shell. I can go into the spirit realm. I can receive what I need when I'm in the shell, and then I can emerge from the shell and execute my function in creation. That's a flip. That's a recalibration. In this society, people go into their shells because of anxiety and fear. When we have a proper contextualization and you feel yourself going into a shell, you're not going into the shell because of anxiety and fear. When you have a proper contextualization rooted in our culture, we're going into the shell not for anxiety or fear, but we're going into the shell to engage the divinatory process. We're going underwater, quote unquote, to engage the divinatory process so we can draw from that reservoir of ancestral wisdom over 1 million generations of earthly experience and wisdom and so forth. We go into the shell, engage the divinatory process, get the information and knowledge of what we need, then we come out of the shell and execute our function and engage that recalibration process. Then it says, I am the essence of every deity. Every organ in your body is a shrine of the various deities in creation. We are a microcosm of the macrocosm. It's Afuraitkaini people. So you are the essence of every divinity. Every organ and system in your body is a center of residence for the divinities that govern those systems. It says, I am yesterday this of the four, talking about the four sons of Aqeru and so forth, governing the different visceral organs, and the Urei 7 or the Aratu 7, these Aratu, these 7 sacred serpent divinities, which came into existence in the East. And when you talk about these 7 serpent divinities, when you look in the pyramid text, they talk about Unas, for example, being the primordial Nile snake. He swallows the 7 serpent divinities, and they become the 7 cervical vertebrae, or the 7 divinities along the spine and so forth, centers of resonance, and then they govern the 7 Paschetu, the 7 companies of the deities that regulate every aspect of being. So he's talking about these 7 primordial divinities, 7 centers of energy within the spirit body. He says, because of that, I am the essence of every divinity. I'm hidden in the plants. I'm hidden in the Taurus. I grew in the form of plants. I'm hidden in the Taurus. I am the essence of every divinity. Yesterday of the 4 and of the 7 serpent divinities that came into existence in the east. Thus, I am the mighty one, the great one, illuminating the ancestresses and ancestors who are illuminate with his body. So you're talking about just like the stars illuminate the darkness so that we can have starlight and find our way through the darkness so we will not be injured in the darkness, giving us that pathway to move about in the darkness, the illumination of the ancestresses and ancestors in the spirit realm when we are in darkness. They give us that GPS or that navigation path so we can make our way through the darkness. They illumine our path with wisdom, with illumination, enlightenment, so that we can find our way without injuring ourselves in the process. And when we crystallize into that function, because we have that Aqeru nature, that perfected nature within our our Kait, then we can do the same thing for those other ancestresses and ancestors, as well as those in our community who have not achieved that level of development yet. So this is what they're talking about. Then they talk about the judgment between Set and Heru. So they mention Set, and then they say Tahuti concerning them by judgment, that of the dweller in Sekhem, talking about Heru. He judged between Heru and Set. We talked about Heru governing the cardiovascular system and Set governing the nervous system, and those two systems working together, one dealing with that electromagnetic force that manifests as desire, Set operating through the nervous system, giving those instructions to every part of the body. When you live in harmony with the Set in the true sense, you're receiving those instructions just like the nervous system is sending messages to every cell in the body, that electromagnetic energy, and then you have the solar energy of Heru operating through the cardiovascular system, carrying that solar energy within the oxygen to every cell in the body to enliven, give that vitality, regulating the flow of the energy of Ra and Rayat to every part of the body, and they work together harmoniously. So Tahuti, the deity of divine wisdom, judges or reconciles the functioning of Heru and Set in balance, together, as they say, with the spirits of Anu. Then he says, sailing among them, I have come, I am crowned, I am Aku, or glorious, or illuminated, I am User, or mighty, I am strong, I am divine among the divinities, I am Khensu, the deity Khensu, repulsing all. So they talk about the transformation into the Bennu. Once you go down, once you go under and so forth, you have the capacity to transform, like the Bennu bird transforming to that fire divinity and so forth, has the capacity to harden or solidify or bring life and vitality to that primordial mound that just rose up out of the water. So if you just rise up out of the water because you went under and you were under the water for a period of time and you fall into what you believe are imperfections, but of course the sun is going to rise every morning. It's not going to just disappear forever. The sun is going to rise. It's going to set and disappear, but then it's going to rise once again. When you go under and the land is submerged and the water is submerging the land and flooded, and you can't see the land anymore, and people have no foundation upon which to stand, and they're floating around in the water, and you go under, eventually that primordial mound rises up. It emerges once again, and the waters begin to recede. So you have that capacity, and you have that opportunity to recalibrate yourself. No matter how long you've been under the water, you have the capacity to recalibrate yourself. So the Bennu bird flies across the primordial water, eyes one of those mounds, and sets upon the mound. That solar energy of the Bennu bird penetrates the mound, hardens the mound, enlivens the mound, and makes it something solid of substance upon which it can stand, upon which it can build. In the same fashion that Ra and Rayat enlivened the primordial mound that rose up out of the primordial waters, that fire hardened it, just like you have a pot that you're making on a potter's wheel, and you place water on the clay and so forth, and you fashion and form it, but it's still soggy. At some point, you're going to have to put it in a kiln. You're going to have to put it in an oven so it can bake, so it can become hardened, and it becomes something of substance. And then when it's taken out, then it can be used. When that primordial mound rises up, it's still wet. It was underwater for a period, it's still wet, it's still soggy, but then the Bennu bird, the fire bird, that sacred animal totem, sets upon that primordial mound, hardens it, solidifies it, gives it life and vitality, and now it's a foundation upon which we can build. And you have the same capacity because that sun is going to rise once again every time. In essence, you came into being from unformed matter, just as Kepra did, grew in the form of plants, hidden in the tortoise, having the capacity to contract within that shell, reach that divinatory understanding, and then bring that divine wisdom back out of the shell. You are therefore the atoms or the essence of every divinity. You become mighty, you become strong, you become illuminated, glorious, and so forth among the divinities, and you become Khensu, the divinity who repulses all. Khensu destroys disorder, destroys discarnate spirits, is a healer, a rectifier, a fructifier, and so forth. He has all of these capacities. He has the capacity to repulse negative discarnate spirits and recalibrate us. So you become like that divinity. That's talking about the essence of the Afurakani man, Afuraitkaitnit woman, that capacity for Aqeru perfection. So we're talking about recognizing imperfections, but through ritual practice, recalibrating and reestablishing and realigning with our central Aqeru perfected nature, which is seated within our Kait. That is the motivational force, the force of inclination that is within us, always driving us towards thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. If you have a force in your head region always pulling you in the right direction, even if you don't follow it, and you suffer the negative consequences of not following it, but just by virtue of the fact that you have a force that you're not controlling, that's pulling you in the right direction all the time, you must understand the reason why it's pulling you in the right direction all the time. Because that Aqeru, or perfected nature, is seated within that force, or else it will be pulling you in directions which will lead you to self-destruction. But since it's in your head, that divinity is in your head, that means you have that perfection within you, and you have access to perfection at all times. Not only do you have access to it, that is your essential nature. Now we're going to read from another text, very short text, that also brings a book into this piece. It is the text, the chapter of making the transformation into the Seshini, which is a title of the lotus in ancient Kemet. It's still in the Runu Pert and Heru. Now, but first and foremost, looking at what a lotus actually is, or a Seshini plant or Seshin plant actually is. So what's different about that particular plant and why it's the sacred plant of the south in Kemet, and then you have the papyrus plant, the watch plant, the sacred plant of the north, but the sacred plant of the south, which is the foundation, which is the source of the culture and the people of ancient Kemet. We came from the south and so forth, ultimately coming from ancient Khanit, Nubia, moving through the south of Kemet to establish civilization, and eventually going to the north and so forth, expanding through the north and the Delta region. But the sacred plant of the south, the Seshin, the lotus, what's different about that particular plant and why it is a plant totem for deities in ancient Kemet, carrying the energy of specific divinities, solar divinities. The lotus, or the Seshin, closes at night and sinks underwater. In the morning, it re-emerges and blooms once again and opens up. So it's a natural symbol for the Aten, the Atenit, the sun in creation. That is akin to us as well. Properly contextualized, it has to do with a cycle. Closing up, sinking underwater, being underwater for a time and in darkness for a time, but then rising up, opening up, reopening up, and blossoming. That's a natural cycle when properly contextualized. If segmented and miscontextualized and misperceived, the closing up of the flower and sinking up underwater for a number of hours, it appears that the flower closed up and died, never to return. When we misperceive specific cycles, then we will assume that the experiences that we're going through, or the capacity for us to withdraw from certain activities and quote-unquote close up and go under. It appears that people are depressed, it appears that people are going through something, it appears that people are suffering and so forth, and we assume that there's something wrong with us and so forth. But when we have a proper perception, that capacity to close up, go underwater for a period, and then re-emerge and open up at the time of the rising sun and so forth, that is a natural cycle. Not only is it a natural cycle, it's a sacred cycle governed by a specific divinity. So let's look at understanding that nature of the Seshen, the lotus. Then we look at the chapter of making the transformation into the sacred lotus. I am the Sesheni pure, or the pure lotus, coming forth from the divinity Aku, the divinity of divine light, the guardian of the nostril of Ra, the guardian of the nose of Heru. I make my journey, I run or advance or progress after him who is Heru. I am the pure one coming forth from the field. So when we talk about the Seshin, the lotus, saying I am the pure one coming forth from the divinity of light. So when we have gone under, when we closed up, we went underwater for a period, then we come forth from the divinity of light. Then it says, I am the guardian of the nostril of Ra, the guardian of the nose of Heru. Of course, in the text of comments, they'll talk about once the lotus rises up in the from the primordial ocean, then the sun itself, the Aten or Atenit, is born from the lotus and then rises up into the sky, and there's the first illumination of the day and so forth, and they'll talk about Heru, or they will talk about Ra inside of the sun rising up out of the primordial lotus and so forth. So they'll just talk about that's what it is. But what we're talking about here, and what cosmologically what it's talking about when it says guardian of the nostril of Ra, guardian of the nose of Heru, of course, when the opening of the plant takes place, it says the nostril of Ra, and they talk about the Ra breathing in the energy of the plant and so forth. When that blossom takes place, it opens up at the rising of the sun. Two things are going on. Number one, there's a release, of course, of oxygen. So when we talk about the nostril of Ra, we're talking about that vital energy, drawing in the oxygen that enlivens us. So that's the guardian of the nostril of Ra. When that sacred lotus opens up and releases that oxygen, oxygen carries the divine life force energy of Ra and Ra'et. That is what enlivens us from this sacred plant totem. Then it says guardian of the nostril of Heru. Heru is the divine force in creation that governs divine beauty, which is the fusion of complementary opposites, manifestation of order, which is divine harmony, which is expressed through beauty. When you see beauty in the true sense, that is an expression of divine harmony. Harmony is the proper function and application of all things in existence. That is a manifestation of divine order. When you see things operating in harmony, you're seeing order or divine order manifest. When things are disharmonious, then that's a corruption or perversion of the created order. Heru regulates ordered fusion. The manifestation of divine order is harmony, and beauty is expressed through that. So when that blossom opens up, you're empowered or enlivened by the oxygen. That's the nostril of Ra as well as Ra'et. But then, of course, when that blossom opens up, it also releases not only oxygen that enlivens you, but it also releases an aroma that beatifies you or places you in harmony. The pleasure that comes from the aroma of the plant recalibrates you. If you were out of order, if you were suffering, if there was illness, if there was discordance within your spirit, the beauty of the aroma, the harmonious fumes and so forth come forward, fill up your nostrils, and place you in harmony with order, recalibrate you. So you're enlivened or given vitality through the oxygen. You're empowered or placed in harmony through the aroma. The nostril of Ra, the guardian of the nostril of Ra, the guardian of the nostril of Heru. Once you've been enlivened and given that vitality of the oxygen, once the blossom opens up, then you're empowered and placed in divine harmony, manifesting beauty through the nostril of Aqeru, through the fumes of the plant. Then after that takes place, you have vitality, and that vitality is harmonized. So you're manifesting order, manifesting harmony, manifesting beauty. Once again, your perfections have been eradicated, those temporal imperfections. Then it says, I make my journey. I advance after he who is Aqeru. I am the pure one coming forth from the field. So then you emerge from the field just like the plant life emerges from the field in beauty, in harmony, manifesting divine order. So those texts are speaking to the nature of the Afurakani male, Afuraitkaitnit female. When we operate according to our nature, we recognize that those so-called imperfections are not really obstacles. When we understand the reality that our perceived imperfections become the enemy of our progress towards the goal of Amanne nationism, but our proper understanding of our essential nature, Aqeru, perfection, that becomes the engine, the empowerment towards our progress towards the goal and the advancement towards the goal of nationism, that nation-building restoration from a pure foundation. This is the information we want to get forth tonight, and of course, the manner in which we activate that is through invoking the Ka, invoking the Kait, invoking the soul, the deity dwelling in the head region, the Ka male, Kait female. Of course, we establish a shrine for the Ka, the deity that dwells in the head region, the shrine for the Kait. In Yoruba, there's a shrine for the Ori, the Ibori shrine in the Akan tradition, the Kradim Bosom Nkomre, the shrine for the Kradim Bosom, which includes the shrine for the Okra. In the Vodun tradition, there's a shrine for the Seilido. In the Igbo tradition, there's a shrine for the Chi, the deity dwelling in the head region. So in every tradition, we establish a shrine space for the deity that dwells in the head region so that we can suspend all regular activity for a certain period on a consistent basis, on a periodic basis, whether it's daily or every other day, whatever schedule you are on, that you make, that pact you make with the divinity. You stop doing all other activities, engaging in all other activities, and you focus on that divinity to invoke that divinity and learn directly from that divinity, recalibrate yourself energically, recalibrate yourself consciously so that you have proper perception. Misperception of our imperfections, that's the enemy to our progress towards the goal of nationism, of Amanne. The proper understanding of our essential natures as Aqeru, perfected individuals written into our nature that empowers our progress or our advance towards the goals of nationism. So that's the key. So when we deal with this whole notion of the Ka and Kait, the Okra, the soul, divine consciousness, in relationship to our nature as Afurakani men, Afurakani women, this is the subject of the book, the Okra complex, so you can read that book. You can download, of course, that book. That's one of our 29 books. All of our ebooks are free downloads, so you can download that entire book for free. You can download the entire Obatine, Afuraitkaitnit, African Womanhood book for free. You can download the entire Obedima, Afurakani, African Manhood book for free, as well as all of our 29 books for free. Of course, we also have the soft cover versions of our 29 books for sale, and they range between $8 and $11. So if you'd like to support the work we're doing, you can purchase one or more of our 29 books in that fashion, but the ebook versions are free, and you'll get the details on the nature of the Ka. The Ka is the soul, the divine consciousness as a deity dwelling in the head region, and how that applies to manhood and womanhood. When we build strong men, Afurakani men and Afuraitkaitnit women, then that is the foundation for strong relationships. Strong relationships are the foundation for strong marriages. Strong marriages are the foundation for strong families and child rearing. And of course, strong families are the foundation for strong communities. And of course, the foundation for strong communities is nationism is rooted in strong communal foundations. Nationism, the purification of nationalism. This is why, number one, back in February, a few weeks ago, we had our Hapi Merit retreat, our training, cultural, and ritual retreat, focused on Oberima Afurakani manhood and Obatain Afuraitkaitnit womanhood. And we had a great event. We are having our Kait, Soul of Hoodoo and Voodoo retreat coming up in May during the Memorial Day weekend. It is in Treme, New Orleans. It's that Saturday and Sunday, May 26th, May 27th. We'll be conducting the Oberima Afurakani manhood workshops. I'll be conducting that with the brothers. Voodoo Queen Kalinda Laveau will be conducting the Obatain Afuraitkaitnit womanhood workshop based upon the book Obatain Afuraitkaitnit womanhood with the sisters. We will also have the joint sessions for Fatah Sasatim, as well as the joint session dealing with Hoodoo and Voodoo, which is the Akan ancestry religion, and the Phone and Ebe ancestry religion, preserved in the blood circles of our people in North America. We'll be talking about Hoodoo and Voodoo in the context of Afurakani manhood and Afuraitkaitnit womanhood and nationism, the purification of nationalism. So that event is coming up. All this information we talked about tonight in building these strong families, first and foremost building ourselves, overcoming the misperception of our imperfections, and dealing with our essential nature. All that information and building ourselves, strengthening ourselves, and then strengthening our relationships and our families and our communities and so forth. And the Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit nation, Ujiraman, the purified nation, Afurakani Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere, will be dealing with all of that at the retreat. And of course, we will also have a cultural tour of New Orleans, which Kalinda does, an authentic voodoo tour dealing with the sacred sites of the ancestresses and ancestors in New Orleans and so forth. We'll have vegan food. We'll have a number of different things going on that weekend. So we put that information out a few weeks ago. We are close to 50% of our spaces. We're only going to have 25 people for the retreat. Have a smaller number so we can, be very in-depth. So we're close to 50% of the spaces being taken. We anticipate that by the weekend we will be able to close registration because most of the people between today and tomorrow's a payday and so forth, and a number of people said they wanted to, sign up and reserve the space. So if you would like to attend that retreat, it's first come, first serve as far as registration. So go to our Kait page, Soul of Hoodoo and Voodoo Retreat on our website. You see that on the Ojirafo website as well as Kait Akan on Facebook, Ojirafo Akan on Facebook. We have a Kait Soul of Hoodoo and Voodoo Retreat page on Facebook and also an event notification. So you can sign up for that. We also have a payment plan for the registration fee. You can pay half of it up front, and then a couple of weeks later, it's a $200 fee, which includes the food, includes the free books, the 3 different books that you'll receive, the tour, all of those different things. You can pay $100 up front, and then weeks later you can pay the second portion. Also, there's a 50% discount on married couples who attend the retreat. At the previous retreat in South Carolina on Edisto Island, the Gullah Island, back in February, we had 5 married couples, which was a good mix. So we had people who were unmarried, but then we also had married couples, so they were able to give their experience with regard to marriage and nation building and so forth. So, and of course, we promote that as well. So married couples is a 50% discount on the registration fee. So it's only one registration fee for a couple. You don't have to both pay the same registration fee. It's one fee, 2 for 1 for couples. So all of that information is on the site. So that's the broadcast for tonight. The AMANSEM broadcast is typically a shorter broadcast. So we're going to end the broadcast here. If you have any questions, just send us an email via Facebook or on our regular kwaitiakan@gmail.com, our regular website email. And once again, Yedase, we thank you for tuning into the broadcast. And Yebesha Bio, we will meet again. That's it.